Hey guys, the Gemaniac back again, bringing you another video. Now today we'll talk about basically the protests that were covered. People were protesting essentially the AFD and essentially the secret meeting that they had, and the remigration plans that they said was that they agreed with, but found it not feasible and not realistic, essentially. But we'll get into it and we'll see what this article says. So, this is an article by The Guardian, it's an opinion piece. It says the growing popularity of Germany's far right has become an unpalpable feature of Europe's political landscape. Last summer, it won a district election outright for the first time in 2013. Since the first time of being found in 2013, on a virulent xenophobic platform, now lies second in national polls and leads three eastern states that will hold elections in the autumn. As Chancellor Olaf Scholz's coalition government has struggled to navigate the multiple challenges of COVID, Ukraine, cost of living, and the green transition, the AfD has exploited widespread insecurity and hardships for its own unpleasant ends. Now, this means is that what they're saying is that the AfD is attempting to wrangle more votes from the working class, the farmers. They're coming out to attempt to show solidarity. But one thing is, which I know that they're doing, is that they're not trying to become the centerpiece of the protest, which is very clever. Because if they do, then it would be even greater grounds to attack them on and say that they're essentially opportunists. Now, the AfD has been attempting to essentially get more voters. They attempt to get the working class and the, what should we call it, migrant skeptic voters or asylum skeptic. And we can see that the SPD and even other governments, CDU, actually mimicking them to a degree. So a lot of these articles talk about, you know, the AfD being anti-migrant or anti, asylum seeker to an extent, but in reality, they are trying to copy them just to a lesser extent. So with the asylum seekers, they're changing benefits, so it's just Germany doesn't seem as good to come to. So instead of getting money outright, you would get like essentially like food stamps. And just a couple other things. They're planning on larger deportations. Schultz said like they're planning some of the largest deportations ever. And so when it comes to, this anti-democratic or anti-migrant rhetoric, essentially all parties are doing the same thing. And I think they realize that because the AfD is growing in such power, they need to mimic them to a degree. And the AfD has successfully pulled them to the right. And now these centrist parties are starting to essentially essentially follow them in terms of being anti migration or anti asylum seeker, we could say. But the other part of this is that the SPD has, well, SPD CDU, or the CDU for example, they've shown that you've had Merkel say multiculturalism has failed, yet they've really done nothing about it. And so people who were skeptic of the centrist parties have just decided to go all in on the a far right one because they're over the mass immigration into Germany. They don't think it's good for German society. They don't like it. They don't really care about the economics of it either, and they just don't want foreigners who aren't assimilating to be in their country. But it's not only that, it's that even if you did have foreigners assimilating in the country, even at the same levels, people don't like it. It rubs people the wrong way when they start to become a minority within their own countries. And I especially think when it's seen as uh, an ancestral country like Germany, where there is like a certain ethnicity. Well, German is an ethnicity. It's made up of four ethnicities basically. Um, and when you get more added to the mix, you can see that it lowers social cohesion. Um, it even lowers voter turnout. There's a bunch of negatives socially that happens when you do get larger amounts of immigration. But basically, the article goes on and says Schultz and Annalena Baerbock, who is Scholz's foreign minister, joined in a march of about 10,000 to basically condemn the AfD on this secret Nazi meeting they had with Mons Sellner, who is a, what would you say, like a white identitarian, you could say he is. And Sellner's idea was to basically produce a remigration plan of what they could possibly do when it came to too many foreigners being in the country. So the most extreme extent was to remove German citizens, but who were also ethnically foreign if they were not assimilated. Which, funnily enough, you could say that was extreme, but the fact that it wasn't actually to the extreme of, well, if they're assimilated, we don't care, but because they're not assimilated, it's very funny. Just like they do have that cutoff point where obviously, like in a kind of 1930s 40s Germany, they would, it's just like, well, even if they're ethnically, even if they've assimilated. Oh, I'm actually not too sure. Even if they're assimilated, well, you're not ethnically German, so who cares? But we still have this cutoff point, and I think that really shows that people don't care too much as long as people do assimilate. But it has to be in low numbers. It has to be low enough numbers where it's not noticeable, where it's like a 1 in 100 kind of scenario. I don't think anyone really cares too much about that 1 in 100 scenario because there is massive pressure after that point for the person to assimilate. And so the assimilation works so well. But when you start getting, larger groups come in from mass migration, well, they tend to go towards people who are more similar to them. And so there's less pressure to assimilate. And we also had the idea of multiculturalism originally, which I'm not sure if Germany still tries to sell that as have that as a selling point. I know in Australia it does, that you don't even need to assimilate with a multicultural society. You don't need to do anything. So that's the next question. A really interesting one. This would be good for the AfD to use as like a strategy. Have some of this would be fun. I mean, this would just be funny, essentially have it in a completely different language and be like, well, we don't need to assimilate, you know, like a meeting or something. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. But what is the pressure to learn German? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The multicultural society, I don't have to do anything, right? So for me, I don't know German. I know a little bit of German, but what is the pressure? Everybody speaks English. Hey, just learn English. So the article essentially goes on to say, they're condemning, I don't know, a bit of a ramble there, but they're essentially condemning the AfD as they strategically should do, and that, they don't like the idea of remigration and that they're a threat to democracy. But the question is, if 30% of the country are voting for it, and let's say theoretically 50% or 60% vote for it, then, and you want to ban it, then who's the threat to democracy after that? That's a real interesting question. And so the only way they could really argue against it is that essentially to call them fascist and essentially saying, well, look, they have proponents in the party who are secretly more right wing than they're letting on. And this is what their actual goal is. But you would need hard evidence from leadership to actually be able to prove that. Later in the article, it goes on to say, one of the strategies they want to do is to, given a high legal, the shocking nature of the latest disclosures has led to calls for the party to be banned by the Federal Constitutional Court. Given a high legal bar, that might be very difficult to achieve. So actually, you know what? Maybe I'll make a video on that too. What will the other parties have to do to prove that the AfD is actually anti-democratic and needs to be banned? That would be actually an interesting video. But anyway, it goes on, explains essentially how the AfD essentially came and how they're using the venting of the populations to basically give themselves a greater platform. But I mean, like it just reminds me that, whose fault is it? Is it the AfD's fault for taking advantage of this kind of stuff, as is their prerogative? or is it the other parties who aren't satisfying what the voting people, what a like a large majority of voters want? So that's the actual question. What is the SPD, what are centrist parties like the CDU going to do to essentially take votes away from the AFD again? And then the next problem is that a lot of people just don't trust them because they haven't done anything to kind of fix this in the last few years. So they've kind of destroyed their goodwill. But but there's been a few articles made about this. Thousands march outside of Berlin. Apparently, 10,000 people took place. And then the other one where it's officials from Germany, far right AFD attended a meeting with Mann Sellner, the party confirmed Wednesday, but denied any plans to adopt proposals for mass deportations of immigrants reportedly discussed at the talks. So, I mean, a lot of people just do want, a lot of these asylum seekers and immigrants removed from the country. And if they vote for it, then they vote for it. That's all you can really say. But if it's up to the SPD, we'll go over a video later of what the SPD and centrist parties should do to counter it. But that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked it, like and subscribe or follow. I mean, I post this on Rumble as well. So if you're a Rumble watcher, yeah, I guess it's called follow on there, right? But what do you think? What should the centrist parties do to pretty much counter the AFD? I mean, listen to the voter could be a good start, but some people think a lot of the goodwill from these centrist and SPD parties they've been burnt. But yeah, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I got another one coming out shortly. Thanks.